My name is Sarah, and I'm 37 years old. I've spent most of my life being the family member who never forgets a birthday, who shows up early to help set up for parties, and who stays late to clean up after everyone else has gone home. I'm the one who remembers which cousin is allergic to shellfish, who keeps extra phone chargers in my purse for family gatherings, and who always has tissues ready when someone needs them. For as long as I can remember, I've been the reliable one, the thoughtful one, the one who smooths over conflicts and keeps the peace. But somewhere along the way, being reliable became being invisible, and I didn't realize it until it was too late to pretend otherwise. Growing up in a large extended family in the suburbs of Chicago, I learned early that love meant showing up. Our family was the kind that looked perfect in Christmas card photos. 4 generations gathered around my grandparents' dining room table, everyone smiling in coordinated outfits my mother spent weeks planning. We were the Johnsons, and being a Johnson meant something in our little corner of Illinois. My grandfather had built a successful construction business from nothing, and my grandmother had been the president of every charitable organization in town. Success, appearance, and family loyalty were the pillars of our identity, and I absorbed these values like a sponge desperate for water. My mother, Patricia Johnson Miller, was the eldest of 3 children and the self-appointed keeper of family traditions. She would spend hours preparing for family dinners, consulting her collection of handwritten recipe cards that dated back to my great-grandmother, making sure everyone's favorite dish was on the table. She kept a notebook, I remember, with detailed notes about dietary restrictions, preferences, and even which uncle preferred his steak medium rare versus medium. She would quiz me on these details when I was young, teaching me that remembering someone's preferences was a form of love, that anticipating needs before they were expressed was the highest form of care. What I didn't understand then was that some tables have assigned seating, and no amount of devotion can earn you a chair if they've already decided you don't belong. The earliest memory I have of feeling different was at my cousin Jessica's 6th birthday party. Must have been 4, maybe 5, wearing a pink dress my mother had bought to match the party theme. I remember standing at the edge of the bouncy castle, watching the other children play, waiting for someone to invite me in. They never did. When I find in the family, it started the mess. A cousin. When I called to RSVP, my Aunt Margaret had laughed nervously and said, "Oh, we weren't sure you'd want to come. It's mostly family." The words stung, but I forced myself to laugh too, pretending I was in on a joke I didn't understand. I went to the wedding, of course, wearing a dress I'd spent too much money on, trying to look like I belonged. In the photos, I'm always at the edges, holding someone's bouquet during the ceremony, seated at the table furthest from the head table with distant relatives and family friends, despite being a first cousin. The family group texts were perhaps the most insidious form of exclusion because they were so easy to explain away. There was the main family chat that I knew about, where people shared major announcements and holiday greetings, but I started noticing references to conversations I hadn't been part of, inside jokes that had clearly developed somewhere else. When I asked about it at Thanksgiving one year, my sister Emma had looked uncomfortable before admitting there was another chat, just for planning stuff. She'd added me right there at the dinner table, but I could see the history only went back a day. They'd created a new group and added me rather than include me in the existing one. The message was received. I could have the appearance of inclusion, but not the real thing. Photos from family gatherings became a particular source of pain. We live in an age where everyone documents everything, and my family was no exception. But scrolling through Facebook or Instagram after events, I noticed a pattern. In group shots, I was consistently cut out or standing just outside the frame, my shoulder or the edge of my dress the only evidence I'd been there at all. When I was included, it was always in the awkward, obligatory shots, the ones where someone remembered at the last minute to call me over. There's one photo that perfectly captures this dynamic. A beautiful sunset shot at my parents' anniversary party, everyone arranged perfectly on the deck, and me, blurry in the background, walking into frame because no one had told me they were taking the picture. My cousin Janet had posted it with the caption, "All the cousins together," apparently not noticing or not caring that I was barely visible. Each incident had a perfectly logical explanation, and I accepted them all because the alternative was too painful to consider. They forgot. The mail was slow. The group chat glitched. The photographer didn't realize I wasn't in the shot. I became an expert at excusing their behavior, at finding reasons that weren't personal. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that I was imagining slights where none were intended. This self-gaslighting was perhaps more damaging than their actual behavior because it meant I was complicit in my own exclusion, constantly questioning my own perceptions rather than trusting what I could plainly see. I remember the exact moment I started to question whether these oversights were really accidents. It was at my nephew Tyler's 5th birthday party, a dinosaur-themed extravaganza that my sister Nicole had been planning for months. I'd offered to help with the decorations, spent an entire weekend handcrafting paper pterodactyls and painting a massive cardboard volcano that actually erupted with baking soda lava. The day of the party, I arrived 2 hours early to help set up, my car loaded with supplies and the special dinosaur cake I'd ordered from Tyler's favorite bakery an hour away. Nicole seemed surprised to see me, checking her phone as if she'd forgotten to tell me something. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd come to recognize but couldn't quite name. "We actually moved the party to the park." "Didn't Mom tell you?" The decorations I'd made sat useless in my car as I drove to the park, arriving just as they were singing happy birthday. The cake I'd brought was redundant. They'd already ordered one. I spent the party on the periphery, helping serve food to kids who didn't know my name, watching my family laugh and take photos in configurations that never seemed to include me. That night, scrolling through the photos Nicole posted on social media, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. In the family group shot, everyone was there: aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, even Nicole's husband's family, whom I'd only met twice. But I wasn't in it. I knew I'd been standing right there, just to the left of my mother, because I remembered the moment clearly. Nicole had asked me to take the photo. "It's better if you take it," she'd said. "You're so good with cameras." And like the accommodating fool I was, I'd agreed, not realizing until that moment, staring at my phone in the darkness of my bedroom, that being the photographer meant never being in the picture. The exclusions became more blatant after that, or perhaps I was just finally seeing what had always been there. Family vacations planned in secret WhatsApp groups I wasn't part of. Holiday gift exchanges where my name was mysteriously forgotten until someone noticed at the last minute and hastily added me to someone's list. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered rooms, replaced by stilted small talk about the weather or my job. My sister once let slip that they'd all gone to see a movie together the previous weekend, the same movie I'd suggested we all see together a month earlier. When I asked why no one had invited me, she shrugged and said it was a spontaneous thing, even though I later learned they'd bought tickets online days in advance. The financial aspect of my exclusion was perhaps the most insidious because it was cloaked in false gratitude. My career in healthcare administration hadn't happened overnight. I'd started as a receptionist at a small clinic, working nights and weekends while putting myself through college. Unlike my cousins who'd had their education paid for, I'd taken out loans and worked 3 jobs, missing family gatherings because I had shifts to cover. No one seemed to notice my absence then, or if they did, they certainly didn't offer to help with tuition or even textbooks. But I was driven by something deeper than ambition. Maybe it was the need to prove I was worth including, or maybe it was just the Johnson family work ethic that ran in my blood despite their efforts to thin that connection. By 28, I'd worked my way up to office manager. By 30, I was overseeing 3 clinics. By 35, I'd been recruited to a major hospital system as a senior administrator, with a salary that would have made my grandfather proud if he'd lived to see it, and if anyone had bothered to tell him about my success. The money changed things, but not in the way I'd hoped. I remember the first time I offered to help financially. My cousin Janet's daughter, Mia, needed braces, and Janet had been crying at a family barbecue about not being able to afford them. Without thinking, I'd offered to cover half the cost. The way Janet's tears had turned to relief, the way she'd hugged me and called me an angel, it felt like finally being seen. But within minutes, the rest of the family had surrounded me with their own financial troubles. My Uncle Robert mentioned his hours had been cut at work. My Aunt Patricia complained about the cost of her son's travel baseball team. Even my own mother had suddenly remembered she'd been wanting to renovate the guest bathroom. By the end of that barbecue, I'd somehow committed to several $1,000s in family assistance. At first, I told myself this was what family did for each other. This was my way of contributing, of earning my place. When my Uncle Robert lost his job entirely, I slipped him money for groceries, telling him it was a loan we both knew would never be repaid. When my parents' roof was damaged in a storm, I handled the insurance deductible and the cost overruns without being asked. I set up a college fund for my sister Emma's kids, contributed to my other sister Nicole's house down payment, and even helped my cousin Marcus start his food truck business. I created an LLC specifically for family assistance, channeling money through it to avoid the awkwardness of direct handouts. I never asked for credit or recognition. I genuinely believed that this was what love looked like in action. What I didn't realize was that my generosity had become expected, taken for granted, and worse, had somehow diminished me in their eyes. I wasn't a successful family member to be proud of. I was an ATM with feelings they didn't have to consider. The more I gave, the less they seemed to see me as a person. Success hadn't earned me respect or inclusion. It had simply given them another reason to keep me at arm's length while keeping their hands out. I discovered this painful truth during what should have been a moment of celebration. I'd just been promoted to Vice President of Operations, the youngest person in the hospital's history to hold the position. It came with a significant raise, stock options, and recognition that my innovative approaches to healthcare administration were making real differences in patient care. I'd called my mother to share the news, breathless with excitement. Her response? "That's nice, dear. Actually, since you're doing so well, I wanted to talk to you about helping your cousin Terry with his student loans. He's really struggling." She hadn't asked a single question about my promotion, hadn't offered congratulations, hadn't even pretended to be proud. I was simply doing well, which meant I could do more for others. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Family dinners where my career was never discussed, but my ability to pay for everyone's meal was assumed. Christmas gifts that were clearly afterthoughts, while I spent hours selecting perfect presents for each family member. Birthday celebrations where my financial contributions were essential, but my presence was optional. I funded vacation homes I was rarely invited to use, paid for family reunions where my inclusion was an afterthought, and covered emergencies for people who couldn't remember to call me on my birthday. I'd become the family's secret benefactor, invisible except when the bills came due. The breaking point came on what should have been an ordinary Sunday in July. The temperature had hit 95 degrees, and I'd driven 2 hours through construction traffic to be at my nephew Aiden's 9th birthday party. Emma had mentioned it casually during a rare phone call, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, by the way, Aiden's party is Sunday at 2. You don't have to come if you're busy." The dismissive tone should have been a warning, but I'd long ago trained myself to hear invitations where only obligations existed. I'd spent the entire previous Saturday hunting for the perfect gift. Aiden was obsessed with robotics, and I'd found an elaborate Lego Mindstorm set that would let him build and program his own robots. It was expensive, more than I'd usually spend, but I remembered being 9 and feeling like the world was full of possibilities. I wanted to give him something that would make him feel seen and special, the way I'd always longed to feel at his age. I'd even watched YouTube tutorials to make sure I could help him with the programming if needed. The party was in full swing when I arrived. The backyard transformed into a carnival, complete with a bounce house, face painting station, and a magician performing for a crowd of enthralled children. I stood at the garden gate for a moment, gift wrapped in silver paper with an elaborate bow I'd learned to tie from a Pinterest tutorial, watching the scene. Emma was in her element, orchestrating the chaos with the efficiency of a seasoned party planner, while her husband Dan manned the grill, surrounded by the other dads discussing golf handicaps and stock portfolios. I found Aiden in the thick of a water balloon fight, his face painted like Spider-Man, screaming with the pure joy only children at birthday parties can achieve. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Aunt Sarah?" he yelled, breaking away from his friends to give me a hug that left my sundress damp and my heart full. "Did you bring me something cool?" I always brought him something cool, a fact he remembered even if the adults didn't. We spent the next hour together, him showing me his gifts, introducing me to his friends with the proud announcement that I was his aunt who worked at the big hospital and saved people. In those moments, I could almost forget that I was the only adult who'd gravitated toward the children's area, rather than joining the clusters of conversation among the adults. The party was winding down by 5 o'clock, parents arriving to collect sugar-crashed children, the magician packing up his tricks, the bounce house slowly deflating like my hopes of ever truly belonging. I was in the kitchen, automatically starting the dishes because that's what I did, what I'd always done. Emma was at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, occasionally directing me to where things belonged with the casual authority of someone used to having help. Her sisters-in-law were in the living room, their laughter carrying through the thin walls, discussing a girls' trip to Napa they were planning. No one had asked if I wanted to join. The conversation was mundane, discussing the party, which kids had eaten too much cake, whose parent had been late again. I was elbow-deep in soapy water, scrubbing frosting off plates, when I mentioned casually, almost without thinking, I'm looking forward to the family reunion next weekend. Can't believe it's been 5 years since the last one. I'll finally get to use that potato salad recipe Mom taught me. The words hung in the air like a wrong note in a familiar song. Emma's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor with a sound like breaking promises. The noise brought everyone running, Dan with a broom, the sisters-in-law with concerned clucks, even a few lingering parents peering in to make sure everything was okay. But it wasn't the broken glass that made my blood run cold. It was the look on their faces, a mixture of guilt, annoyance, and something that might have been pity. They all knew something I didn't, and worse, they all knew that I didn't know. My cousin Marcus was the one who broke the silence. He'd always been the family diplomat, the one who smoothed over conflicts with jokes and subject changes. But even he couldn't joke his way out of this. "Oh, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Didn't anyone tell you? We had to move it. It was last weekend." The words hit me like physical blows, each one precise and devastating, last weekend. While I'd been home, organizing my contributions for the reunion, making my special brownies that everyone always requested, practicing the toast I'd planned to give about family bonds surviving time and distance, they'd all been together, without me. My mind struggled to process this information. Last weekend, I'd been home alone wondering why the family had been so quiet on social media. Now I knew. My legs felt weak and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. The math didn't add up. Family reunions took months of planning. There were emails about food assignments, discussions about activities, arguments about whose turn it was to organize the games. How had all of that happened without a single message reaching me? My mother appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion from the living room where she'd been holding court with her sisters. She was wearing the coral sundress I'd bought her for Mother's Day, the one she'd said was too fancy for everyday wear. Apparently, family reunions where I wasn't invited warranted fancy. Her face was carefully composed into an expression of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. The same look she used when dealing with difficult customers at the boutique, where she worked part-time for fun money. "Sweetheart," she said, using the pet name that suddenly felt like a pacifier for a child. "We tried to call you, but your phone must have been off." This was a lie so transparent I almost laughed. My phone was never off. I was the emergency contact for half the family. I was the one they called when they needed rides to the airport at dawn, when they needed someone to pick up prescriptions, when they needed bail money that one time we don't talk about. My phone lived permanently at 40% battery because I never let it die, terrified of missing something important. They knew exactly how to reach me when they needed something. The reunion just hadn't qualified as something I needed to know about. My Aunt Patricia, always one to twist the knife with a smile, pulled out her phone with theatrical eagerness. She'd been waiting for this moment, I realized, had probably been disappointed when I hadn't asked about the reunion earlier so she could deliver this blow herself. "Oh, let me show you the pictures," she exclaimed, her voice bright with false cheer. "You would have loved it, Sarah. We had it at the lake house, just like when we were kids. Remember how you used to love swimming there?" Her thumb swiped across the screen with practiced ease, each photo a carefully curated reminder of my exclusion. The pictures were beautiful, I had to admit. Professional quality even, because of course my cousin Terry had brought his photographer girlfriend. There was the banner I'd helped design years ago, reused for this reunion I wasn't invited to, strung between the same trees where I'd climbed as a child. There were my cousin's children playing the three-legged race I'd suggested at the last reunion, the one where I'd twisted my ankle but kept hopping because little Mia needed to win something that day. There was the dessert table with the tablecloth my grandmother had crocheted, the one I'd carefully hand-washed after every event because I knew how much it meant to her. And there was the entire family, 4 generations strong, posed on the deck of the lake house as the sun set behind them, golden and perfect and complete without me. In one photo, I spotted the potato salad bowl I'd gifted my mother last Christmas, robin's egg blue with hand-painted daisies, filled with what looked like her famous recipe. The same recipe she'd taught me to make when I was 12, standing on a step stool to reach the counter, promising that one day I'd make it for my own family gatherings. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me that she'd made it for a family gathering I wasn't part of, using the bowl I'd chosen specifically because it matched her kitchen and would look perfect at family events. The photos kept coming, relentless in their documentation of joy I hadn't shared. My father manning the grill, wearing the apron I'd bought him that said King of the Grill, surrounded by my male cousins, as he no doubt told the same stories about his college football days. My sisters posing with their children, color-coordinated in shades of blue and white that someone had clearly planned in advance. Group shots organized by generation, by family branch, by everything except any configuration that would have included me. There was even a photo of them toasting the family matriarch, my grandmother's memory, with the crystal glasses she'd left to all of us. All of us who were there, anyway. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. I stood there, soap suds still clinging to my hands, watching my aunt flip through photos like she was showing me vacation slides from a trip to a place I'd never been invited to visit. The broken plate lay in pieces on the floor, a perfect metaphor for something I couldn't quite name yet. My cousin Marcus shifted uncomfortably, at least having the grace to look embarrassed. Emma had stopped pretending to clean, her dish towel hanging limp in her hands. Even Dan and the sisters-in-law had gone quiet, their discomfort palpable, but not quite enough to make them speak up. And then we've been trying to tell you nicely for years. The words hit me like physical blows. Each syllable was precise, calculated, designed to wound, trying to tell me nicely. For years. The family assigned roles in the slow, systematic exclusion of Sarah from family life. The thought made bile rise in my throat. The words hit me like physical blows, trying to tell me nicely. For years. I looked around the kitchen at these people I'd loved unconditionally, and suddenly saw myself through their eyes. The trying too hard aunt, the one who didn't get it. The one who kept showing up despite all their efforts to discourage me. I was a barnacle on the ship of their family, clinging despite their attempts to scrape me off. The realization was so acute, so devastating that I felt physically ill. I set down the dish towel with deliberate calm, walked to the living room where Aiden was playing with his other presents, and kissed him on the forehead. "Happy birthday, buddy," I whispered. He looked up at me with confusion, perhaps sensing something in my voice, but before he could say anything, I was gone. The drive home was a blur. I pulled over twice, not because I was crying too hard to see, though the tears did come, but because I needed to vomit. The physical revelation of years of denial leaving my body was overwhelming. By the time I reached my house, I was empty, hollowed out, but strangely clear-headed. I sat in my car in my own driveway for an hour, engine off, just breathing. When I finally went inside, I did something I'd never done before. I poured myself a large glass of wine and sat down at my computer. I opened my banking app and started adding up every dollar I'd given them over the years. The total made me laugh, a harsh sound in the quiet of my home office. It was enough for a down payment on a second house. It was enough for a luxury car. It was enough to have taken a year off work to travel the world. But I'd spent it on people who had been trying to get rid of me for years. That night, I made a decision. Not in anger, though I had every right to be angry. Not in revenge, though the thought did cross my mind. I made it in clarity, in the kind of sharp-edged understanding that comes when illusions finally shatter completely. I wasn't going to fade away quietly like they wanted. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. If they wanted me gone, they were going to have to deal with the consequences of my absence. All of them. The first thing I did was practical. I called my lawyer the next morning, a friend from college who specialized in family law and financial planning. Rebecca listened to my situation with the kind of professional sympathy that somehow made it easier to bear. She didn't try to talk me out of it or suggest reconciliation. She simply asked, "What do you want to accomplish?" "I want to reclaim everything that's mine," I told her, "and I want to do it legally and irrevocably." She smiled, a shark's grin that reminded me why she was the best in her field. "Let's get to work." Over the next 2 weeks, we methodically went through every financial entanglement I had with my family. The monthly payments I'd been making to cover my parents' health insurance supplements, the college fund I'd set up for my sister's kids, the small business loan I'd co-signed for my cousin's boutique, the family phone plan I'd been paying for because it was easier to keep everyone on one account. Each one had been set up casually, verbally, based on trust and love. Now they would all end formally, legally, with proper documentation. But the biggest revelation came when we reviewed the paperwork for the lake house. 5 years ago, when my grandfather's estate was being settled, there had been a significant tax burden that threatened to force the sale of the family's beloved lake property. I had quietly stepped in, paying off the back taxes and, at my mother's tearful request, becoming a 49% owner to help with ongoing costs. The family retained 51%, ensuring they maintained control, but my investment had saved the property. What they didn't know was that the agreement included a clause I'd insisted on, almost as an afterthought at the time. If any party wanted to sell their share, the other party had the right of first refusal at market value, minus 10%. It had seemed like a way to keep the property in the family. Now it would serve a different purpose. The notification started going out on a Tuesday. Formal letters from my lawyer's office, delivered by certified mail, requiring signatures. The automatic payments stopped first. My parents' insurance supplement, the phone bills, the monthly deposits into various accounts. Each cancellation was accompanied by a formal letter explaining that the informal financial arrangements were being terminated, effective immediately. My phone started ringing within hours. Didn't answer. I had already blocked most of their numbers, but some got through from work phones or numbers I didn't recognize. The voicemails piled up, a chorus of confusion, anger, and for the first time in years, genuine interest in my well-being. My mother's message was particularly revealing. "Sarah, honey, there must be some mistake. We got this letter about the insurance payments. Did someone steal your identity? Are you in some kind of trouble? Call me back immediately. We need to figure this out as a family." As a family. The phrase that once would have warmed my heart now sounded hollow, almost mocking. We hadn't been a family for years. I had just been the last to realize it. The most satisfying letter was the one regarding the lake house. I exercised my right of first refusal, offering to buy out the family's 51% share at market value minus 10%, as specified in our agreement. The current market value, thanks to the booming real estate market and the improvements I'd funded over the years, was substantial. They had 30 days to accept my offer or buy out my share at the same terms. Either way, the status quo was ending. The property that had hosted the reunion I wasn't invited to would either be mine entirely or would have to be sold to pay me out. The poetic justice wasn't lost on me. My sister Nicole was the first to show up at my door. It had been 4 days since the letters went out, and she looked haggard. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her designer workout clothes looked like she'd slept in them. I didn't invite her in. We stood on my porch, the morning sun casting long shadows between us. "You can't do this," she said without preamble. "Mom is beside herself. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. This is insane, Sarah." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a kind of distant curiosity about this stranger on my porch who happened to share my DNA. "I'm not doing anything," I replied calmly. "I'm simply stopping. There's a difference." She launched into a tirade then, alternating between accusations and appeals. I was being selfish, destructive, vindictive. Didn't I understand what this would do to the family? How could I abandon our parents in their time of need? What kind of person turned their back on blood? I let her rant, noting with clinical detachment how she never once apologized, never acknowledged the years of exclusion, never admitted to any wrongdoing. When she finally ran out of steam, I asked her a simple question. "When was the last time any of you called me just to see how I was? Not because you needed money or help or someone to watch the kids, but just because you wanted to hear my voice?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. She opened her mouth several times, but no words came. Finally, she turned and walked back to her car, her shoulders rigid with an anger that told me she still didn't understand. The calls and visits continued over the next 2 weeks. My cousin Janet came by with her daughter, the one whose braces I'd paid for, as if showing me the straight teeth I'd financed would somehow guilt me into reversing course. My Uncle Robert left a 6-minute voicemail detailing how my selfishness would destroy the family, conveniently forgetting the months I'd kept his lights on when he was unemployed. My Aunt Patricia sent a scathing email calling me a narcissist who couldn't handle not being the center of attention, which was so ironically backward I actually printed it out and framed it. But it was my father's visit that almost broke my resolve. He came on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after everything started. Unlike the others, he called first, asking simply if he could come by. When I opened the door, I was struck by how old he looked. My father had always been a mountain of a man, strong and steady, but now he seemed diminished, shoulders bowed under an invisible weight. He didn't try to come in, just stood on my porch holding a small box. "Can we talk?" he asked, and something in his voice made me step aside and let him in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless meals when I was young, back when I still believed I was part of something unbreakable. He placed the box between us but didn't open it. Instead, he looked at me with eyes that were mirrors of my own and said, "I failed you." The words hung in the air like a confession at a church neither of us attended anymore. He continued, his voice steady but soft. "I knew what was happening. I saw it, how they pushed you out, how they made you feel like you didn't belong. And I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that it was just personality clashes, that you were strong enough to handle it, but really, I was a coward. I didn't want to rock the boat. I chose the easy path, and I chose wrong." The tears came then, for both of us, not the angry tears I'd cried in my car or the bitter ones that had marked my first nights alone, but something cleaner, like grief finally acknowledged. He opened the box then, revealing a collection of photographs I'd never seen. Pictures of me as a baby, a toddler, a gap-toothed kindergartner. In every photo I was smiling, reaching for the camera, reaching for connection. There was one of me at about 7, arms wrapped around his neck, my face buried in his shoulder. "I was your shadow," he said softly. "Wherever I went, you wanted to be. And I let them convince me that was a problem, that you were too clingy, too needy. I let them convince me to push you toward independence when all you wanted was to belong." We talked for hours that day, the first real conversation we'd had in years. He told me about the family dynamics I'd been too young to understand, how my mother's family had always been cliquish, how my sisters had learned early to play the game of favorites and alliances. He told me how he'd watched me try harder and harder to fit in, and how it had broken his heart, even as he'd done nothing to stop it. By the time he left, the sun was setting, painting my kitchen in shades of gold and amber. He stood at my door, looking older but somehow lighter. "I won't ask you to forgive us," he said. "I won't ask you to come back. But I need you to know that losing you is the price we're paying for our choices, and it's a price that's too high. I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you. I just forgot to show it when it mattered." After he left, I sat with those photos spread across my table, tracing the face of a little girl who had no idea what was coming. The me in those pictures believed in unconditional love, in the power of showing up, in the unbreakable bonds of family. I couldn't go back and protect her from the disappointment that was coming, but I could honor her by refusing to accept anything less than real love, real acceptance, real belonging. The 30-day deadline for the lake house was approaching, and the family was in chaos. Heard through the grapevine, mostly from mutual friends who were trying to understand what had happened, that they were scrambling to either raise the money to buy me out or convince me to withdraw my offer. Emergency family meetings were being held, the same kind they'd excluded me from for years. The irony wasn't lost on me that my absence had finally made me the center of their attention. It was my nephew Aiden who broke through the wall I'd built around my heart. He sent me a video message on my birthday, a day that came and went without acknowledgement from the rest of the family. In the shaky footage, clearly shot in secret, he held up a handmade card covered in glitter and crooked letters. "Happy birthday, Aunt Sarah," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Mom says I'm not supposed to talk to you, but that's stupid. You're the only one who remembers that I don't like crusts on my sandwiches. I miss you. Are you mad at me?" The video cut off abruptly, probably when someone caught him, but the damage was done. I sat on my bathroom floor and sobbed, not for myself, but for him, for the cycle of exclusion and silence that was already being passed to the next generation. I sent him a message back, careful and coded in case others were monitoring his tablet. "Hey buddy," I wrote, "I could never be mad at you. You're one of my favorite people in the whole world. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, but that doesn't change how much I love you. Keep being the amazing kid you are. P.S. No crusts is the only way to eat a sandwich." I didn't hear back, but I hoped the message got through. I hoped he would remember that someone had chosen honesty over comfortable lies, that someone had shown him it was possible to love people and still protect yourself from them. The resolution came in a way I hadn't expected. 2 days before the deadline, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize, probably borrowed from a friend. I almost didn't answer, but something, maybe the same instinct that had made me help all those years, made me pick up. "Don't hang up," she said immediately. "I'm not calling about the money or the house. I'm calling about us." Her voice was different, stripped of the careful modulation she usually used, raw and real in a way I hadn't heard since I was very young. "Sarah, I need you to know something. We're not going to fight you on the lake house. If you want it, it's yours. We can't afford to buy you out, and frankly, we don't deserve to. But I need you to understand why we did what we did, why I let it happen." What followed was the most honest conversation my mother and I had ever had. She told me about her own childhood, about being the outsider in her family, about marrying my father partly to escape that dynamic. She told me how, when I was born, so much like her in temperament and appearance, it had triggered something in her she didn't understand. Instead of protecting me from what she'd experienced, she'd unconsciously recreated it, pushing me to the margins because that's where she'd learned people like us belonged. "It wasn't an excuse," she said firmly. "There is no excuse. But maybe understanding helps. Maybe it helps you know that it was never about you, Sarah. It was about my own broken parts that I never fixed, my own wounds I let fester until they infected everything around me." We talked until our phones died, plugged them in, and talked some more. She told me about the family meeting after my father's visit, how he'd finally stood up and told them all exactly what they'd done, how they'd driven away the best of them, the one who gave without keeping score, the one who showed up without being asked. Some of them had been defensive, angry, unwilling to accept responsibility. But others, like her, had been forced to look in the mirror and see the truth. The family was fracturing, she admitted, but maybe it needed to. Maybe the facade of closeness had been hiding something rotten that needed to be exposed to heal. By the time we hung up, the sun was rising. I hadn't forgiven her. That would take time if it came at all. But I had heard her, really heard her. And for the first time in my life, I felt like she had heard me too. The next day, I withdrew my offer on the lake house with one condition. The property would be placed in a trust with professional management, and any family member could use it by reservation only. More exclusive gatherings, no more using it as a weapon of inclusion or exclusion. It would be neutral ground, available to all or none. They agreed immediately. The financial entanglements took longer to resolve. Some family members cut contact entirely, unable to forgive me for what they saw as abandonment. Others, like my father and eventually my mother, began the slow work of rebuilding a relationship based on honesty rather than obligation. My sister Nicole never apologized, but she did send back every gift I'd ever given her children, a petty gesture that told me everything I needed to know about who she really was. Emma surprised me by showing up one evening with a bottle of wine and a simple declaration. "I was wrong. I was cruel. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. We're still working on it, but at least we're working." The most unexpected outcome was the family I found in the spaces left empty by the one I'd lost. It didn't happen overnight. For months after cutting contact, I'd felt untethered, like a boat that had slipped its mooring and was drifting in open water. I'd spent so much of my life defining myself in relation to them, as daughter, sister, aunt, cousin, provider, that I didn't know who I was without those roles. The silence of my phone was deafening at first. No requests for money, no last-minute babysitting emergencies, no guilt-laden invitations to events where I'd be barely tolerated. Just silence, space, and the terrifying freedom to discover who Sarah was when she wasn't trying to earn her place at a table that would never have a chair for her. My friend Melissa from work was the first to notice the change. We'd grabbed coffee one morning, a ritual we'd maintained for years, and she'd studied me over her latte with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "You look different," she'd said finally. "Lighter, somehow, like you've put down something heavy you've been carrying." I'd broken down then, telling her everything in the middle of a crowded Starbucks, ugly crying into my cappuccino while she held my hand across the tiny table. Instead of offering platitudes about family being family or suggesting I should forgive and forget, she'd simply said, "I'm proud of you. Do you know how brave it is to choose yourself when you've been trained your whole life to choose everyone else?" That coffee date became a weekly therapy session of sorts. Melissa introduced me to her book club, a group of women who had become sisters by choice rather than blood. There was Anna, a divorce attorney who understood complicated family dynamics better than anyone. Rebecca, a chef who insisted that food was love and proved it by teaching me to cook for joy rather than obligation. Keiko, these women became my chosen family, and with them I learned what unconditional acceptance actually looked like. When I started dating Marcus, a fellow healthcare administrator who understood the complexity of family trauma and never once suggested I should just get over it for the sake of peace. We'd met at a conference, bonding over our shared experience of being the family ATM before finding our worth outside their approval. Our first date lasted 8 hours, talking in a restaurant until they gently kicked us out, then walking the city streets until dawn, sharing stories of exclusion and survival. He had his own tales of being the successful one who was somehow never successful enough, of funding family dreams while his own were ignored, of realizing that some people only see your value in what you can provide. Marcus didn't try to fix me or push me toward reconciliation. Instead, he held space for my anger, my grief, my moments of doubt when I wondered if I'd been too harsh. He celebrated my boundaries with the enthusiasm most people reserve for achievements, understanding that saying no to people who didn't value you was its own form of success. When I woke up from nightmares where I was still washing dishes at family gatherings where no one saw me, he'd make me tea and remind me that I'd chosen to put down the sponge and walk away. When holidays came and the old guilt crept in, he'd help me create new traditions that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with joy. Together, we built a life that was smaller in some ways, but infinitely richer. Sunday dinners at my new house became legendary among our friend group, not because I knocked myself out trying to please everyone, but because everyone contributed something, even if it was just their presence and their stories. My table was round, deliberately chosen so there was no head, no hierarchy, no better or worse seats. Everyone could see everyone else, and no one was ever left on the edges. We laughed without cruelty, shared without keeping score, and no one ever had to wonder if they were really wanted. The difference was palpable, like breathing clean air after years of smoke. I started volunteering at a local youth center, drawn to kids who, like I had been, were trying too hard to fit into spaces that weren't shaped for them. I taught financial literacy classes, but really, I taught them about worth that couldn't be measured in dollars. I watched kids who'd been labeled difficult or different start to understand that maybe the problem wasn't them, but the narrow definitions of acceptable they were being squeezed into. One girl, Sophia, reminded me so much of myself at that age, always volunteering to help, always trying to earn her place through service. I told her once, "You don't have to earn the right to exist. You're worthy just because you're here." She'd looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, but I saw her start to stand a little taller after that. My therapist, the real one I'd finally started seeing, helped me understand the patterns that had kept me trapped for so long. We unpacked the childhood messages about love being earned through service, about women's worth being tied to their usefulness, about the specific dynamics of being the sensitive one in a family that valued toughness over tenderness. She helped me see that my family's rejection wasn't about my failings, but about their limitations, their inability to value what they couldn't understand or control. Most importantly, she helped me forgive myself for taking so long to leave, for all the years I'd spent auditioning for a role that had been cut from the script before I was even born. A year later, I was at a coffee shop downtown when I ran into my cousin Janet, We stood there awkwardly, two people who had once shared holidays and secrets, now strangers divided by choices and consequences. She looked tired, older, wearing the kind of defeat that comes from realizing too late what you've lost. "Sarah," she said finally, "I need you to know I get it now." We did. What I did. "My daughter asks about you, asks why her Aunt Sarah doesn't come around anymore." I told her the truth. That we pushed you away because we were jealous and small and stupid. She nodded, tears threatening but not falling. "She's saving her allowance. Says when she's 18, she's going to find you and apologize for all of us. I told her she doesn't need to wait that long if you're willing." I gave Janet my new number, the one only my real family had. Whether her daughter would use it remained to be seen. But I wanted to leave that door cracked open. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' cruelty, and maybe, just maybe, the next generation could do better. As I watched Janet walk away, shoulders bent under the weight of regret, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not satisfaction or vindication, but genuine peace. I had broken the cycle, refused to be the family martyr, the one who gave until there was nothing left. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, had finally found my worth. The lake house stands empty most weekends now, I'm told. The family that once gathered there in exclusive clusters has splintered into factions, some speaking, some not, all navigating the new reality where their safety net is gone and their scapegoat has refused to play the role. I haven't been back, though I could. That place belongs to a version of me who thought love meant accepting scraps and being grateful for them. The woman I am now knows better. She knows that real love doesn't require you to shrink yourself to fit at the table. Real love sets a place for you and protests when you're not there to fill it. Real love chooses you, actively and consistently, not just when it's convenient or profitable. Sometimes, late at night, I still grieve. Not for what I lost, but for what I never had. I grieve for the little girl in those photos my father gave me, the one who believed she belonged. I grieve for all the years I spent auditioning for a part in a play where my role had already been cut. But mostly I grieve for them, for a family so committed to their dynamics of exclusion that they'd rather lose a daughter, a sister, an aunt than admit they were wrong. They're still paying the price for their choices, in ways both financial and emotional. The trust fund meetings are apparently contentious affairs, with no one willing to take responsibility for planning or maintenance. The family reunions have stopped altogether, with no one willing or able to organize them. The cousins who once posted constantly about family being everything now share quotes about toxicity and boundaries, each thinking they're the victim in a story where everyone played a part. But I'm building something new. Every friend who checks in just because, every chosen family dinner where everyone has a seat and a voice, every moment I don't have to wonder if I'm really wanted, I'm building. Brick by brick, choice by choice. I'm creating a life where love isn't conditional on compliance, where showing up is celebrated, not expected, where being reliable doesn't mean being invisible. It's smaller than what I thought I had, but it's real. And that makes it worth everything I gave up to find it. The last time I saw my mother was at a grocery store 6 months ago. We ended up in the same checkout line, a cosmic joke that felt too pointed to be coincidence. She looked good, healthier than she had during our last phone call, wearing a confidence that might have been real or might have been armor. We acknowledged each other with nods, two people who had once shared everything and now shared only a complicated history. As she was leaving, she turned back and said quietly, "I see you, Sarah. For the first time in your life, I really see you." And then she was gone, leaving me standing there with tears in my eyes and a heart that didn't know whether to break or heal. I chose to heal. I choose it every day, because that's what the little girl in those photographs deserves. That's what the woman I've become demands, and that's what the family I'm building, the real one, the chosen one, expects. We don't accept less than full recognition, complete acceptance, genuine love. We don't make ourselves smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for us. We build our own spaces, set our own tables, and save seats only for those who show up consistently, honestly, and with their whole hearts. The story of my revenge, if you can call it that, isn't really about revenge at all. It's about revelation. It's about the moment when you stop accepting crumbs and demand the whole meal. It's about discovering that the love you've been begging for was never love at all, just tolerance dressed up in familial obligation. And it's about the terrifying, liberating realization that you can choose to stop. You can choose to walk away. You can choose yourself. And in that choosing, you don't destroy anything that wasn't already broken. You just stop pretending it's whole. These days, I host Sunday dinners in my new home, a cozy craftsman with a kitchen designed for gathering. My table is always full, friends, chosen family, and the few blood relatives who've done the work to earn their place. We laugh without cruelty, share without keeping score, and no one ever has to wonder if they're really wanted. Every seat is deliberately set, every person actively chosen. And when someone can't make it, we feel their absence. We text them photos of their empty chair, jokes about what they're missing, promises that they'll be there next time. Because that's what real family does. They notice when you're gone. They want you there. They choose you over and over again, not because they have to, but because they can't imagine their table without you. I think about Aiden sometimes, and Tyler and Janet's daughter saving her allowance. I hope they're learning different lessons than the ones I was taught. Hope they're discovering that love shouldn't require constant proof of worthiness, that belonging isn't something you earn through service and sacrifice. I hope they know that if their family makes them feel invisible, it's not their job to shine brighter. It's their right to find people who already see their light. The door remains open for them when they're ready, if they're ever ready. But I'm not waiting by it anymore. I'm too busy living a life where I'm not just invited to the party. I'm helping plan it, knowing with absolute certainty that my absence would be noticed, mourned, and unacceptable to the people who actually love me. That's the real revenge, if revenge is what you want to call it. Living well, loving freely, and knowing your worth so deeply that no amount of family manipulation can make you question it again. They taught me through their cruelty exactly how powerful I was. They showed me, through their exclusion, that I was the one holding everything together. And in trying to make me disappear, they revealed just how visible I'd been all along. I was the ghost at their feast, but I was also the one who'd been cooking the meal. Now they're learning to feed themselves, and I'm finally learning to save my best recipes for people who appreciate the chef, not just the service. The irony is perfect, really. In trying to push me out, they pushed me into a better life. In making me feel worthless, they taught me my worth. In excluding me from their definition of family, they freed me to create my own. And that's the gift hidden in the heartbreak, the blessing wrapped in betrayal. Sometimes the family you're born into is just the starting point, not the destination. Sometimes losing them is the only way to find yourself, and sometimes the best revenge is simply living a life so full of genuine love and authentic connection that the fake version they offered becomes nothing more than a distant memory, a cautionary tale about settling for less than you deserve. I am Sarah, 37 years old, and I am no longer invisible. The journey from invisible to seen wasn't just about cutting off my biological family. It was about recognizing my own worth and refusing to settle for relationships that required me to shrink. I am seen, valued, chosen, and loved by people who know that showing up is a privilege, not an obligation. My table is smaller now, but every seat matters. My circle is tighter, but every person in it knows they belong. There's no anxiety before gatherings, wondering if this will be the time I'm finally included. There's no mental math calculating how much love I need to buy with generosity. There's just connection, real and reciprocal and revolutionary in its simplicity. Some days I still feel the phantom limb of the family I lost. I'll smell something that reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen and feel a pang of loss for relationships that existed more in my hope than in reality. I'll see families in restaurants loud and laughing and overlapping and wonder what it would have been like to belong to something like that. But then I remember that I do belong to something like that. It just doesn't look like what I was taught family should be. It looks like friends who became sisters, like a partner who sees me clearly and chooses me anyway. Like young people who trust me with their stories because I've shown them mine. The ripple effects of my choice continue to surprise me. A former colleague reached out recently, saying my story had inspired her to examine her own family dynamics and set boundaries with relatives who only called when they needed bail money or babysitting. My cousin Janet's daughter, the one saving her allowance, did eventually call. We talk every few weeks now, and I'm teaching her about financial literacy and emotional intelligence, hoping she won't need 37 years to learn what I did. She tells me her mother cries sometimes, looking at old family photos, saying she misses her cousin Sarah. I tell her that her mother knows where to find me when she's ready to miss me to my face, not just in my absence. The family business has apparently struggled without my silent financial support. The boutique my cousin owned closed within 6 months. The lake house needs repairs they can't afford. The family reunions have stopped altogether, with no one willing or able to organize them, and more importantly, no one willing to fund them. I heard through mutual friends that they've splintered into factions, each blaming the others for driving me away, none willing to acknowledge their collective role. The family group chat lies dormant, the last message a bitter argument about whose fault it was that I'd found out about the reunion the way I did. They're learning what I always knew. I wasn't the problem. I was the solution they'd taken for granted. But this isn't really about them anymore. This is about me, about the life I've built in the ruins of what I thought I needed. Every friend who checks in just because, every chosen family dinner where everyone has a seat and a voice, every moment I don't have to wonder if I'm really wanted, I'm building. Brick by brick, choice by choice, I'm creating a life where love isn't conditional on compliance, where showing up is celebrated, not expected, where being reliable doesn't mean being invisible. It's smaller than what I thought I had, but it's real, and that makes it worth everything I gave up to find it. The other day, I was at the grocery store when I saw a young mother struggling with 2 kids and a cart full of groceries. One child was crying, the other was trying to climb out of the cart, and she looked on the verge of tears herself. Without thinking, I offered to help her get everything to her car. As we loaded bags into her trunk, she thanked me profusely, saying, "Most people just judge or walk by." I told her what someone should have told me years ago. Accepting help doesn't make you weak. Offering it doesn't make you a doormat. It's about reciprocity, about people who see each other as whole humans deserving of support. She looked at me like I'd said something profound, but it was just the truth I'd paid such a high price to learn. If that's revenge, then I'll take it. But really, it's just life, the way it always should have been, finally being lived on my own terms. Terms where love is freely given and gratefully received. Terms where family is defined by who shows up consistently, not by whose DNA you share. Terms where a seat at the table is never in question because you helped build the table in the first place. I am Sarah, and I am finally, fully, unapologetically myself. And that's the greatest revenge of all. Not needing revenge anymore, just needing to live well and love freely and know that I was always enough, even when they couldn't see it.